Hi everyone, MuseScore 4 is about to be released to the public. It may even have been released by the time this video comes out. In the last little while, I've been looking at the improvements in MuseScore 4 compared to MuseScore 3, and especially at the new MuseSounds that have come with MuseScore 4. Because MuseScore 4 is open source and completely free, it's a perfect piece of software for students who are often on a budget. So my question now is, will MuseScore 4 still be suitable for students, or are there some computers that won't be good enough to run MuseScore 4? To help answer this question, I've invited my friend and colleague Brandon Long from Mr. Long Education, who has his own YouTube channels on information technology and computer applications technology, computer terms, and teacher tips. I'll leave links to his channels in the description. Hi, Brandon. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So we'll start by looking at what computer resources MuseScore 3 uses, and then compare it to MuseScore 4 without MuseSounds, and then also with MuseSounds. And I think that will allow Brandon to give us an idea of what kind of computer can run MuseScore 4.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Just as a baseline, this is the computer we're running it off. It is quite a nice desktop. We have, we've got an i5 processor, 6-core. We're running with 16 gigs of RAM and a nice graphics card, if that makes any difference. And I'm running everything off an SSD hard drive. So that will also help to speed things up. But we want to see what it's doing. So here we are in MuseScore 3, and this is an orchestral score demo that MuseScore brought out when they brought out MuseScore 4 to demo the MuseSounds. So I've just converted it back into MuseScore 3 so that we've got something similar to compare with. So let's see, where should we look at first? The CPU?
Yeah, let's look at the CPU. That's one of the most important aspects, especially when you're dealing with particularly music software. From what I've spoken with other people as well, the CPU is slightly more important than the RAM.
Okay.
And I'll explain more later.
All right, cool. So I suppose if we play back and just see what happens, we'll also get an idea of the sounds that MuseScore 3 is using with this demo. CPU when I was moving it. Okay, so it seems like playback doesn't use too much of the CPU resources,
yeah,
right?
It goes a little bit up when you got more instruments getting involved. But definitely the graphical component of displaying the notes when you move around is taking up most of the CPU resources.
That's really interesting, I find. Yeah, just moving around like that gives that sudden spike in CPU. Yeah. Okay. What about, should we try like putting some notes in, see what difference that makes?
Let's do that, yeah.
So let's go to the oboe. I'll just choose some crotchets and... Okay. So, I mean, that's good.
Small spikes, yeah?
Yeah, and that's a really nice quick response. As I press the notes, they appear. Yeah. So that's always good to see.
And if you search particular aspects of the music, if you jump around, that tends to take up a bit of CPU usage as well.
So if I, for instance, start over here. I think that was just a playback spike, really. That
wasn't anything significant.
No, switching around is fairly good.
Yeah.
Okay. Should we look at the memory usage of this? This is quite a large score, so we might expect it to use a bit more memory for the sound files. Okay. We've got strings, celeste, choir, full choir, piano, harp, large percussion section, medium large brass section, and pretty full woodwind section as well. Okay. So there's a lot happening.
So our baseline's 5.9 gigs at the moment with all the current applications.
Okay. So
let's see how much it changes from there.
So should we now compare it to MuseScore 4?
Sure, we can do that, yeah.
Okay. All right, so here we are in MuseScore 4 now. And as you can see, we've loaded it up with MS Basic, which is the sounds that come with MuseScore 4. So I think we would expect this to kind of perform similarly to MuseScore 3, right? We would want it to. In terms of our CPU, let's, I suppose, just do the same thing and let's play back, see what it does. I would say that's quite a significant CPU spike, right?
Definitely. It's definitely larger than the previous version.
On the other hand, me moving around, that's not doing anything really to the CPU. Then it comes back down again. Okay, so that's definitely the playback is quite a lot of usage.
When you get new software, the software either is going to try optimize what it's currently doing, or it's adding new features. So when it adds new features, that's obviously going to use more of the resources, and optimization will try to reduce that. So it's obviously there are some aspects to the new version of MuseScore 4 which are optimized. We saw when we played in that, but obviously there are aspects where it sparks, and those obviously the sounds are a lot better, so it's using up more resources.
So yeah, I think these sounds are even better than MuseScore 3, even just the MS Basic one.
It did sound a lot better on MuseScore 4. It was a lot more like natural.
Yes,
there was a natural sound to it.
Although I also know that they've kind of had to rewrite the whole playback engine from MuseScore 3. That's kind of one of the reasons why they decided we can't just keep developing MuseScore 3 anymore. We need to like cut it completely and start again. So that's presumably also why the playback stuff is causing. Maybe it hasn't even been optimized as much yet.
Yeah,
that could be, and that's still coming.
Did you say this was a beta version, correct?
Yeah, this is, they call it the release candidate. So we're expecting the release to be sort of made official in the next few days. So look out for that. But yeah, this is still a sort of trial version. If you
so we don't know exactly what is on their schedule to like add to it in that period. Maybe they want to add the optimization for other aspects later.
For sure.
So the other features that they could be adding, which obviously could influence its performance with the actual official version.
Okay, cool. Let's again check the RAM. So now we're dealing with 7 gigabytes. So the same kind of score, but our last one was 5.9.
So it's almost a full gig more of memory that is required.
That's a significant difference, I think. Okay.
Which makes sense if there is like a lot more elements that they are trying to load and that. So it makes a bit more sense that it would use more memory.
Okay. Would we expect that to change as we're playing back? Like if we're playing more instruments?
It depends on the optimization. We will have to see when we play it. If things happen, we can see if it's optimized.
Well, let's keep an eye on that RAM and just play from here. So it seems like MuseScore 4 loads up all the sounds that it needs at the beginning and then doesn't touch it.
And that will add testament to the fact that it's trying to optimize or to load it quickly when you're playing it, so that it's stored in memory so that you can use it. So memory is important in this aspect because obviously it's using more.
Yeah.
So there's an important aspect to it.
Okay. The other one we tried was writing in notes. So let's go find some of that and let's just put some notes in. Right. Did that give us a little kind of a slight bump, but nothing.
Seemed very similar, like to MuseScore 3. I think MuseScore 3 was slightly more responsive, where it went up and down very quickly.
I think so.
This one took a little bit longer, but it's
makes sense maybe with the CPU. It's probably just that aspect of having to play back those few sounds. You know, if I could turn the playback off, it might even be completely responsive. Okay, cool. So that's MuseScore 4 without the MuseSounds. But now, of course, we all really want to see what the MuseSounds are doing to this. So let's jump in there. Okay, so here we are. This is still MuseScore 4, but now with our MuseSounds. You can see they've all loaded up from the MuseSounds options. Oops, don't mean to do that. So let's start with CPU and playback. Wow.
That's significant.
Yeah. But so is the difference in sound.
Yeah.
I mean, that sound is awesome. That's a real proper epic orchestra sound. Okay, if we stop playback, it drops right back down and it's ready to go again.
That shows you how much more they've put into MuseScore 4 with regard to the extra features and how much resources it's taking.
Okay. Wow. All right. So again, like let's go and put in some notes. So just do the same old, same old. So crotchet and yeah, that's definitely
Yes,
not
definitely
as
sense.
responsive, and we can see on the CPU that, and presumably that's why it's not responsive, right? It's
Yeah,
kind of maxing out the
yeah,
CPU and it's not able to process it fast enough.
definitely.
So do you think that's something that they could optimize? I mean, I'm gonna
That,
need
that,
to.
that, that's something that they would need to look at, because a lot of people, they might not be using MuseScore by itself. They might be using with recording software. So
Mm,
you want to make sure that it shares the resources. You also want to look at like how many sample libraries you're using. That could
mhm.
also be a factor. So I would expect them to do some sort of optimization, but
Okay.
the point probably for bringing out the new version is because of the new features. That's probably
Yeah,
the draw card.
for sure.
And so that is where the focus would be. So
Mm,
the fact that you're getting the new features, you would naturally say, okay, we're compromising a bit of CPU
right.
usage for those new features.
So I mean, the playback seemed okay. It was near the top,
Mm.
but for me, I think I would be a little bit worried that just by putting a couple of notes in, it's maxing out my CPU. I mean, that's like this is the whole point of the software is
Yes,
to like
to
write
add
my own
noise.
music. Um, so hopefully MuseScore 4 will watch this and make some kind of changes there. I know other people have commented on the past
Yeah.
that the note input thing is still glitchy
Mm.
and that's probably why it's just using too much resource.
And jumping around to different parts
Yeah,
on the
let's go have a look at that.
the sheet.
So if we go back here, oh yeah,
Also
also
significant. So searching for places in the middle of a workspace, like if you're jumping around in a document, or jumping around in this case,
yeah,
does take a while for it to find the right spot and load the sounds at that particular moment. So it's a sharp jump, but then it stabilizes quite soon after
yeah,
that.
yeah. It does come back quickly. That's quite nice. And even just moving the screen. I mean, so again, that's the visual aspect, right?
Mm.
But now that makes me wonder. I clicked on a note which made it play back. Could that be linked to the same kind of thing as
Could
the?
be.
So if I try to select a bar line, is that also? Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Okay.
Definitely, yeah. So, like, I think when you're developing new software, you want to focus in the beginning, particularly on the new features, and
Mm,
then you can always produce updates later on that do the optimization. But
yeah.
you really want to focus on the new. So that's maybe where they're going. That
Yeah.
let's
Definitely.
see what the new features are. Let's see how the feedback from them, and once that's
Mm,
done, then they can start looking at the optimization
okay.
in updates and patches that they bring out at a later stage.
Right. So I mean, I know that they have already done some optimization,
Mm.
and obviously they've only got so many developers,
Yes.
and it's open source, and so it's amazing what they have done. One of the early things was the to do any kind of playback. It was so super glitchy. Like
Mm.
we were getting these great sounds, but they just weren't playing back properly. So it's great that they've got it to where they have.
When you add new notes, you using the new feature that MuseScore 4 has, which is the what are these extra? Sorry, what are
The
they?
Muse sounds,
The Muse sound.
yes.
When it adds the Muse sounds, when you add new notes, is that adding extra features compared to MuseScore 3 with regard to the Muse sounds?
It's well, we're able to hear that sound as we're writing it, so I
Yeah,
think that is beneficial. But I suppose if we wanted to have a more responsive sound, we could maybe start without the Muse sounds,
yeah,
right? We
yeah.
could just like write everything in MS Basic or even MuseScore 3, I suppose, and then when we want to hear the playback,
Because we've seen a definite difference in the sound and
yeah,
the usage when we use the Muse sounds. You've seen
for
a
sure.
different difference, so that's
Mm,
a big indicator there.
okay. And again, let's check our memory, our RAM usage. So now that is really interesting
Yeah,
for me.
it's been stable. I've been monitoring it on the side there. It's
Okay.
been pretty stable, and that echoes to what I say, that the CPU is one of your key features that you need to be
Mm,
considering when you're looking at a computer that's going to run Muse Score.
okay. For me, it's really interesting that it uses like these are the Muse sounds. I mean, to download them is like they're big sound
Mm.
libraries. So I would have expected that to then have to load into memory and be used. But 6.9, that's even actually slightly lower than what it was using the basic sounds.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any particular
It's
reason for
it's
that?
maybe it's part of the optimization, that even though the sound is a big file, it's
Mm.
taking little aspects of it and loading them as they need
Ah,
them
interesting.
as different threads, for example. It could do something along those lines.
Okay, so even like because we're at this point in the
Yeah,
score, maybe they're saying that you only need these sounds,
yeah.
and so we'll only load those up. Wow, that's
So
quite a cool
that could be a
optimization.
feature. Obviously, it
Yeah.
depends on how they optimize it.
Okay. Fantastic. shall we talk about storage? We've sort of touched on it already a little bit, but
storage is going to impact how long it takes for the program to start up in the beginning. Obviously, that's going to be an indicator there, as well as the space that you require to store all your data.
Okay, so I'll say it again. I have stored all of this on our SSD on this computer, but some people maybe have small SSDs or don't have an SSD at all. How will that impact?
Well, your hard drive is a lot slower with regard to loading time. So your SSD, you'll notice a definite increase in the speed that the program opens because it can load a lot quicker. It's electronic. SSDs also tend to be a lot quieter. So it shouldn't, if you're doing recording, hopefully your recording software will not take that into effect. But it is something to consider that SSDs don't have moving parts. So therefore, there's no real noise where your hard drive, depending on how old it is that. So those are the two key factors, is that SSDs are much faster and they're much quieter. And also, if you're going to be very portable, if you're going to use a laptop and you're going to be moving around, obviously SSDs tend to be more stable when things get jarred and they move around. Your hard drives, if you knock them a little bit, there is more potential for damage because of the moving parts. So those are little aspects when you're considering what you want. Obviously, price is another key indicator. You're dealing with large files here. So if you can spend more money, for example, on a CPU, but compromise going to hard drive, that might be a better compromise for you. And you can always invest later on in external hard drives as your storage, which you can add value. A lot of people use that, especially to have electronic storage and use that.
Right. Okay. So let's just have a quick look. I must bring this over. This is my folder where I've stored all these files, and the MuseScore Sounds demo by MuseScore is 51 kilobytes. So the file itself is actually
very small,
tiny. And it's MuseScore 4 that is doing all the work to make that into the good sound. So maybe we need to look at how large MuseScore is itself.
Yes, definitely.
I did go and look all these things up earlier. So what we have, MuseScore 3 is 0.29 or 300 megabytes in size. MuseScore 4 itself is actually at the moment smaller than that. So that's also like really cool that they can make a new version of this software that is actually smaller than the old one. However, what is big to store is all these libraries, which is the MuseSounds, which was what we're so excited about. So the string's the biggest one at 5.5 gigabytes. Equally, to download that, you're going to need a good internet connection. Woodwind's slightly large. The harp is the smallest one at 100 megs. But yeah, all of these things definitely worth getting for the sounds.
Definitely, that's probably where the added value is those MuseSounds, and we can hear it automatically when you compare the two sounds. So that's obviously where the storage. It obviously won't load all of those files when it's using those files. It's because when you're dealing with large files, like even movies and that, it optimizes it by taking what it needs at that particular moment. So that you're not loading the full data into memory.
So shall we do a little comparison of like the loading time when we first start up each of the softwares?
Definitely.
So let's go back to MuseScore 3. Okay, so we're opening MuseScore 3, and we're seeing some CPU usage. But here's our MuseSounds demo. Let's load it up. I mean, it was almost instant.
Yes. That is a big reason why you've got a solid state drive. Your SSDs are very important in the loading times.
Okay, and there we heard the playback was ready to go. So I clicked on it, and it took a little bit of time to load, but I don't think it was that long. And it's ready to go.
It's very responsive. It loads very quickly.
Yep.
So very quick to use.
All right, cool. MuseScore 4 it is. Let's go. So that was almost even quicker to load up MuseScore 4. Should we try it without the sounds first?
Yes.
Yeah? So I think it's this one. Let's see. We should see a loading at the bottom here. That is definitely not as quick as MuseScore 3.
Yeah, definitely. It does take a lot longer to load all the sounds, definitely.
We must also remember this is a big score. I think most people are not going to be using such huge scores. We just wanted to sort of tax the system a little bit and see what's happening. And now it's ready to go. Okay, so that was,
it's relatively the same. The other things to consider is obviously when you open up a program, a portion of it is, or a part of it is stored in cache memory. So because we've used this file recently, or this program recently, it could be loading from cache depending on your cache usage. So that is a thing to consider. If we started this computer from scratch and opened up MuseScore, you might have a better indicator of what it actually takes to load the software.
Right. Okay.
But just be aware, if you open up software and you open up a second time, it does load quicker.
It will load quicker. Okay. So let's try then. Let's see if we can clear its cache, I suppose. Start at MuseScore 4 again, and then we'll go for the one with the MuseSounds. So here's with MuseSounds. Now it seems to me that that's actually loading faster than the MS Basic.
Yes.
So that's very exciting for everyone who loves to use MuseSounds. And it does its little CPU spike and ready to go.
So this just shows you how important the solid state drive is when we're working with a sub of software. You want it to load very quickly. Its response time is also very good. So
yeah. So I think something to maybe take note of for everyone is that if you have your MuseSounds installed in your SSD, that's really the best place to have it, right? Yes. If you have your MuseSounds installed in maybe you've got another hard drive, an external or whatever it is, that's definitely going to impact
the loading time, definitely.
How quickly it loads. Great.
I think we've covered a lot. We can look at what type of things we're going to look at for a computer. If you were looking to buy a computer, those were things that you could consider. From what I've looked and spoken to people involved with music software, particularly, the key factor is your CPU, and there are lots of factors involved with that. So when they develop CPUs, they're developing them at a rate of knots at the moment. So if you buy a computer today, it is possible to upgrade the CPU.
Okay.
However, there are other factors that influence it. Like sometimes when they create a new CPU, they change the motherboard.
Right.
So you really want to optimize as much value as you can with your budget into that CPU.
Okay.
You want to be looking at. They recommend 8 cores if possible. 6 is good.
So
this is good.
This is still a 6, yeah. Okay.
This is 6, so this is good. It can handle 6. Obviously, this is 2022 going into 23.
Yeah.
So obviously, if we do this in a couple of months' time, the specs might be different. You never know the way things are going. But you really want to look at multiple cores. Those are words that you're looking for. Ideally, 6 to 8 is your range that you should be looking at least.
So if we're looking at particular models, I know it's at this stage, but so an i3, would that cut it? An Intel i3 processor?
We are running at the moment on a R5.
Yeah.
The newer R3s could be on par with the R5. So just to take note, like when you compare it, R3s are normally less powerful than R5s and then less powerful than R7s and so on. But if you're comparing a very old R5 with a very new R3, it's very possible that the R3 is a better performing.
Okay.
So you also want to look at the gigahertz values, make sure that's nice and high.
Right.
So those are little factors that are very important for the CPU usage. And that's why when we talk about the CPU, it's if you're going to invest in a computer, look at those specs first.
Right.
Because your RAM is a lot easily upgradable. You can upgrade it a lot easily. It's also cheaper to upgrade your RAM.
Okay, that's a good tip.
So those are facts. So they recommend the 8 to 16 range when it comes to memory.
Okay.
We run in 16 and we've seen how nice it's running. It didn't affect it. So especially if you're doing other programs with your MuseScore, like you're doing recording and stuff like that, you really want to optimize. So you're dealing with a high spec computer. That is what you do when any multimedia needs high specifications. So memory is important, but that initial buy, you want to invest as much into that CPU usage.
Okay.
The graphics isn't used as much when it comes to musical aspects. If you're going into video editing, then that will become a more important thing. But if you look online, most of the recommendations, they don't even consider the GPU and that, as long as the CPU is where it's really at. So you're looking at that word, the cores, you want that number as high as possible. And you're looking at the gigahertz to be as high as possible, ideally as much as you can.
Cool.
There are different manufacturers. The Intel seem to be very popular, the latest Intel processors. The AMD Ryzen series, they're very popular as well.
Right.
But some of them there have been reports that some of them don't load the latest MuseScore, and so they don't work as well.
Wow.
I think they'll change that. Obviously, I'm speaking on hearsay at the moment. But those are the processes that a lot of people recommend is when it comes to music editing and in that type of field. And so the CPU is very important. Your SSD. It's a nice to have as well. It optimizes things, but if you have a budget and you can afford a better CPU, but you have to then go with a normal hard drive, I would put your investment into the CPU, because you can always add external hard drives. The hard drive usage is getting better. The USB speeds are also getting better, so your externals will be better performing. So those things are easily upgradable. Your CPU is upgradable, but it is the more difficult one to do.
I think the CPU, especially because sometimes you need to then replace the motherboard as well, and then that's a whole big thing.
Yes, that's a massive thing. And also, like, if you're going to be moving your computer around, obviously you're going to go more with a laptop route, and you're also more limited in that, because the software, any editing software, obviously has a high heat. It uses a lot of heat in the CPU, so there are the little factors like that you want a more powerful cooling fan in that. Ideally, your best case, if you can be stationary, to use a desktop, you can get more value for your money with a desktop, because they are cheaper with the same specs as a laptop. Your laptops tend to be cheaper, so that you can invest a lot more in that. So you want to optimize that as much as you can. You sometimes see the word threading as well. Now, threading is when basically when a processor tries to make it seem like it's multiple processors. So that's where threading, so one core could make it seem like it's two cores if you're using what they call hyper threading. It's not as important when it comes to musical score, because sometimes some of the music scores are using single thread, so that's not as big a deal.
And we don't actually know if MuseScore is using multi-threading or not at this stage.
We're not too sure, but from majority of when you consider any software, your hyperthreadings are nice to have, but multi-cores is better. So hyperthreading is just a way of scheduling it to make it seem like that. It's almost like trying to pretend that it's multi-core, where you want the benefit of multi-core. It's going to be a lot better. There are some things that multi-core can do that hyperthreading won't be able to do. So you really want to, that's where you want to focus. Don't worry too much about the hyperthreading aspect. I would concern more investing in
get the more cores,
higher the gigahertz. Those values should be as high as possible.
Great. So let's say I'm a music student and I've just started, getting into music notation. My granny's given me her old laptop. Is it going to work with MuseScore 4?
Well, obviously it depends on the specs. Obviously, you can try it out and see. Luckily, there is different versions. So if the MuseScore 4 doesn't work, you can maybe go back to the older version. That might be your compromise.
Although we were kind of seeing, I think, that if it works with MuseScore 3, it's probably going to work with MuseScore 4. Just maybe the CPU might be struggling.
The CPU would be the main factor there. So you would have to look at the specs, obviously, of the laptop that you're getting from your granny. So if most of the time, people, when they buy laptops, especially if they buy it for their simple home usage, like a simple, what we call a home user or entry-level user, they tend to have computers that are entry-level specs. So they don't tend to be high in RAM or high in CPU usage. So my gut would tell me that probably isn't a high spec computer. You look in, so there are three categories. You've obviously got your basic computer user. Then you've got your SOHO, which is your home office, small office type of user, which is a little bit more high spec, especially if you're running like accounting software. And then you've got your power user, which is your engineer and your gamer. And I feel that with music editing, anything to do with multimedia, it may not be fully on the power level, but it's closer to power level than it is to your basic entry level computer user.
Okay. Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming along. It's been great to have you. Bye, everyone.